The fluorescent lights of the courtroom blurred into a cruel, humming glare. Eleanor Vance, draped in widow's black, felt the air leave her lungs. The judge had just validated the will that left her with nothing. Across the aisle, Seraphina Dubois. The mistress, young, stunning, and merciless, gave a slow, triumphant smile. She had won. The penthouse, the fortune, the company. All of it. As Eleanor's world tilted and the polished floor rushed up to meet her, her last conscious thought was, "It's over." But it's what happened after the collapse, when the judge cleared his throat and opened a second sealed envelope that turned a legal proceeding into a legend. The day they buried Arthur Vance, the sky over Manhattan wept a cold, relentless November rain. The droplets clinging to the black canopy of the limousine were the only tears Eleanor Vance could muster. She sat spine-rigid, a perfect statue of grief, in a custom Givenchy mourning dress. Beside her, her son, Julian, 28, and already bearing the premature solemnity of his father, stared blankly at the fogged window. Arthur Vance, a titan of global logistics, a man who could move mountains of cargo across oceans with a single phone call, had been felled by the one thing he couldn't negotiate with: pancreatic cancer. The last 6 months had been a blur of sterile white rooms, the sharp scent of antiseptic, and the quiet, whirring dread of hospital machinery. Eleanor had been his wife for 35 years. She had been his partner when Vance Global was just a single rusted freighter in the Baltimore harbor. She had hosted the dinners, charmed the investors, and raised their son while Arthur conquered the world. She had, she believed, been his rock. Until she appeared. The funeral at St. Thomas Church was a somber affair, a sea of black umbrellas and dark suits, the financial and political elite of New York. As the casket was being carried out, a disturbance rippled through the back pews. A woman, impossibly young, and poured into a blood-red Herve Léger dress that clung to her like a second skin pushed past the ushers. "I have a right to be here," she'd cried, her voice a theatrical sob. It was Seraphina Dubois. Eleanor had only seen photos damning JPEGs from a private investigator's report that Julian had quietly commissioned 3 months ago, titled Subject S. Dubois. Seraphina was Arthur's project, a former gallery curator from Miami with a dubious past and an insatiable appetite for the Vance lifestyle. Arthur, in the throes of his mortality, had become infatuated. Now Seraphina stood at the graveside, dramatically tossing a single white rose onto the casket, her crocodile skin Christian Louboutin heels sinking into the mud. She caught Eleanor's gaze and held it. There was no shame, no remorse, only a glittering, defiant challenge. Eleanor felt the first crack in her composure. It wasn't just grief she was feeling. It was a cold, unfamiliar rage. That evening, back in the cavernous Fifth Avenue penthouse that overlooked a rainy Central Park, the family lawyer Gideon Blackwood arrived. Blackwood was a relic of an older New York, a man who wore 3-piece suits and smelled of old books and subtle, expensive cologne. He was the managing partner at Hadley, Stern and Finch, and had been Arthur's personal attorney for decades. "Eleanor Julian," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "My condolences. This is a difficult time, but Arthur was specific about the timeline." He placed a heavy cream-colored envelope on the antique mahogany desk. "This is the preliminary reading of Arthur's last will and testament. It was executed 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. Deep in the fog of his illness. Eleanor nodded, numb. Julian stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed. "Just read it, Gideon." Blackwood broke the wax seal. He put on his reading glasses and cleared his throat. He began with the usual legal boilerplate, the donation to the alma mater, the setting aside of funds for the Vance Foundation, and then the bombshell. Regarding all personal and real property, including the residence at 740 Park Avenue, the estate in the Hamptons, the chalet in Gstaad, and my private art collection, I bequeath them in their entirety to Ms. Seraphina Dubois. Eleanor's hand, reaching for a glass of water, froze. Julian let out a choked sound. "What?" Blackwood. His face, impassive, continued. "Furthermore, my controlling stake, 60% of Vance Global Logistics, I bequeath in its entirety to Ms. Seraphina Dubois, with the request that she be appointed chairman of the board effective immediately." The air was sucked from the room. Eleanor couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. And finally, Blackwood read his eyes, refusing to meet theirs. "To my wife, Eleanor Vance, and my son, Julian Vance, I leave the sum of $10,000 each to be paid from the estate's liquid assets for their troubles." He finished reading. The silence that followed was heavier and more suffocating than any grief. Julian lunged forward, grabbing the document from Blackwood's hand. "This is a joke. It's forged. He was doped up on OxyContin. He didn't know his own name half the time." "The document is in order." "Julian," Blackwood said, his voice flat. "It was signed, witnessed by his private nurse, and notarized. As of this moment, Ms. Dubois is the sole executor and beneficiary of the Vance estate." As if summoned, the doorbell chimed. The housekeeper, pale and trembling, opened it to reveal Seraphina Dubois, flanked by 2 large men in dark suits. She smiled a wide, predatory expression that didn't reach her eyes. She was holding a bottle of Dom Perignon. "Gideon, thank you for handling the formalities," she purred, striding into the living room as if she owned it, which apparently she now did. "Eleanor, Julian, I'm so sorry for your loss," she gestured around the room. "I do hope you'll be comfortable wherever it is you end up, but I'll need the apartment cleared by the 1st of the month. I'm having it redecorated. All this beige, it's just so old." Eleanor finally looked at her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood up, walked to the bar, and poured herself a stiff Macallan 25 Arthur's favorite. She turned her eyes 2 chips of ice. "Get out of my home." "I'm afraid," Seraphina said, popping the cork with a festive bang. "It's my home now, but don't worry." She poured a glass, the champagne fizzing angrily. "I'll let you keep the 10,000. Think of it as a severance package." Julian took a step toward her, his fists clenched, but Eleanor put a hand on his chest. "Not here, Julian. We're leaving." "But Mom, this is—" "We are Vances," she said, her voice low and steel-edged. "We do not brawl with interlopers. We fight, and we win." She downed the scotch in one gulp, the liquid fire a poor substitute for the inferno building in her chest. She grabbed her purse and walked out of the penthouse she had lived in for 30 years, not looking back. The sound of Seraphina's laughter followed them all the way down in the elevator. The Vance widow and mistress feud was blood in the water for the New York Post. Page 6 ran a week-long special, "From Penthouse to Poor House Widow Vance Evicted," and "The Vixen of Vance, Global Seraphina's 500 Bambun Payday." Photos were everywhere. Serafina stepping out of a new red Ferrari draped in Fendi and carrying a new Birkin bag. Serafina hosting a lavish party at the Hamptons estate, the one where Eleanor had raised Julian. Serafina at the head of the Vance Global boardroom, having summarily fired Arthur's entire executive loyalist team. Eleanor and Julian, meanwhile, had moved into a modest two-bedroom apartment at the Bristol Plaza, a long-term stay hotel. It was comfortable, but it was a cage. Their assets were frozen. The Amex Black Card was declined. The joint accounts Arthur and Eleanor had shared for decades were locked, now property of the estate of Arthur Vance, managed by Serafina's new legal team. Eleanor's high society friends had vanished. The calls stopped. The invitations to galas and benefits dried up. In the cold, cruel calculus of the Upper East Side, she was no longer relevant. She was a casualty. "We have to fight this, Mom," Julian insisted, pacing the small living room. He had been on the phone for days trying to rally support from minority shareholders at Vance Global, but Serafina's 60% stake was a fortress. "We will," Eleanor said. She was not idle. She had liquidated the few assets in her own name, some jewelry, her own stocks, and hired Clara Hayes, a notoriously sharp-witted probate lawyer from Sullivan and Cromwell. Clara was the opposite of Gideon Blackwood. She was young, dressed in impeccably tailored pantsuits, and had a mind like a steel trap. "It's bad, Eleanor, I won't lie," Clara said, spreading documents across the hotel dining table. "The will is ironclad on its face, signed, witnessed by his nurse, Dr. Isabella Ramirez, and notarized. Our only angle is testamentary capacity and undue influence." "He was sick. Clara, he was on so much medication," Eleanor insisted. "I know, but they will argue he had lucid moments. Serafina's team will paint you as the cold, distant wife, and her as the loving companion who brought him joy in his final days. They will say this was his dying wish to provide for the woman he truly loved." The words stung, but Eleanor didn't flinch. "What about the nurse doctor, Ramirez?" "She's their star witness. Swears Arthur was sharp as a tack and adamant about the changes. We checked her finances. 2 days after the will was signed, a $100,000 bonus landed in her account, wired from an offshore account controlled by Serafina." "Blackmail a bribe?" Julian asked, hopeful. "Or a gift," Clara countered. "Which is what they'll claim. It's circumstantial. We need something more. We need a smoking gun." Eleanor spent her nights searching. She went through old storage units, boxes of letters, 35 years of memories, looking for, she didn't even know what. One rainy afternoon in a forgotten storage locker on the west side, she found it. Tucked inside an old steamer trunk beneath Julian's college memorabilia was Arthur's old locked leather-bound journal. He had kept one religiously for years, but she hadn't seen him use it in the last decade. This one was old, from the 1980s. "It's locked," she told Clara, bringing it to the office, "and I have no idea where the key is." "We can have a locksmith open it," Clara suggested. "No," Eleanor said, a sudden fierce possessiveness washing over her. "If Arthur locked it, he did it for a reason. I'll find the key. It has to be somewhere." The search for the key became an obsession, a distraction from the impending legal storm. She tore apart old suits, dismantled antique boxes. Nothing. Meanwhile, Serafina's lawyer, a reptilian shark named Marcus Thorne, was playing hardball. He filed a motion to have Eleanor and Julian formally sanctioned for frivolous litigation and simultaneously sent a settlement offer. "He's offering $1 million, Clara told Eleanor over the phone. "For both of you. To be split. You walk away, drop the suit, and sign an NDA that you will never speak of Arthur or Serafina again." $1 million? Julian scoffed. The art collection alone is worth 90 million. The Degas is worth 20. It's an insult, I know, Clara said. But it's also a sign. They're nervous. If their case was so perfect, they'd offer nothing. They're worried about discovery. They're worried about what we might find. Eleanor looked at the locked journal on her nightstand. Tell Mr. Thorne to go to hell, she said. We'll see him in court. The weeks leading up to the trial were a brutal campaign of legal warfare. Marcus Thorne, Serafina's attorney, was a master of the scorched earth tactic. He filed motion after motion burying Clara Hayes and her small team in mountains of paperwork. He subpoenaed Eleanor's personal diaries, Julian's college transcripts, and phone records from the last 5 years, all in an attempt to paint a picture of a broken, loveless family. They're alleging estrangement, Clara explained, looking exhausted during a late-night strategy session. They're building a narrative that Arthur had already emotionally divorced you and Julian, and the will was just the legal finality. He called me every single night he was on a business trip for 35 years, Eleanor said, her voice trembling. Even if it was just to say goodnight. He wasn't estranged. He was sick. The public humiliation continued. Serafina was now the darling of the tabloids. She gave a tearful exclusive interview to a daytime talk show. I never asked for any of this, she wept, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, careful not to smudge her makeup. Arthur was my soulmate, his family. They never understood him. They only saw him as a bank. I saw his soul. This wasn't about money, it was about love. I'm just trying to honor his final wishes, and they're persecuting me for it. The public, by and large, bought it. The narrative of the young, beautiful muse versus the cold, old money wife was too tantalizing. Eleanor felt herself shrinking. The fight was draining her. She was losing weight. Her nights were sleepless, spent staring at the ceiling of the sterile hotel room, or turning the locked leather journal over and over in her hands. The key. Where was the key? She tried to remember Arthur's habits, his hiding places. He was a creature of routine. He loved his study, his old trench coat, his books. She went back to the storage unit, a damp concrete box that held the ghosts of her marriage. She pulled out boxes labeled Arthur Office. Inside were old files, defunct awards, and his collection of first-edition spy novels by John le Carré. She picked one up, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It felt heavier than it should. She shook it. Nothing. She flipped through the pages. And there, tucked into a hollowed-out section in the middle of the book, was a small, ornate brass key. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She raced back to the hotel, fumbling with the lock on the journal. The key slid in. It turned. She opened the book. The pages were filled with Arthur's familiar, forceful scrawl. But it wasn't a journal from the 1980s. The first entry was dated only 4 months ago. He had hidden his current journal inside the cover of an old, discarded one. She began to read. October 1st. The diagnosis is final. 6 months, they say. 6 months to undo a lifetime of mistakes. Ellie doesn't know the half of it. She thinks I'm just a fool for a pretty face. But Serafina, she's not a fool. She's a predator. Eleanor's breath caught. She read on her horror mounting. October 5th. Met with David Chen, the PI Julian hired. The boy was right. Serafina isn't Dubois from Miami. She's Sarah Jenkins from Chicago. She has a history. 2 other wealthy, older patrons who died suddenly. Both left her substantial sums. Both families contested. Both families were silenced by scandals that emerged from nowhere. October 9th. She knows I know. I confronted her. I told her to leave. She just smiled. And then she showed me her insurance policy, documents, falsified bank transfers, emails, all designed to frame Julian, to make it look like he's been embezzling from Vance Global, funneling money into an offshore account for years. It's brilliant in its wickedness. It's a perfect forgery. She says if I cut her off or expose her, the documents go straight to the district attorney and the New York Times. It would destroy Julian. It would tank the company stock before the merger. October 12th. She wants the will. She wants everything. She called it compensation for her silence. She knows I'm dying. She knows I don't have time to fight her. She brought her own nurse, Dr. Ramirez. My loyal staff is gone. She's isolated me. I am a prisoner in my own home. Eleanor was sobbing thick, ragged breaths. This wasn't an affair. It was an execution. October 14th. I signed it. I signed her damned will. She had Dr. Ramirez film it. I smiled. I read the script. I told her I loved her. It was the most disgusting thing I have ever done. She kissed me, and I could smell the triumph on her. She thinks she's won. She's smart. But I am Arthur Vance, and I have one more move to make. Eleanor turned the page. It was the last entry. October 15th. I got Gideon here, my one remaining loyalist. He came in through the service elevator disguised as a food delivery. Serafina was out celebrating at Bergdorf's. I'm weak, but my mind is clear. I've written it out. A holographic codicil. A final amendment. Gideon has it. He's had it witnessed by his associate, and he will file it with the court under seal. It is to be opened only after the will she forced on me is validated. Let her have her day in court. Let her commit perjury. Let her build her entire house of cards on the sand of her own greed. Then and only then can Gideon pull the pin. Ellie, my Ellie. I'm sorry. I was a fool for letting this viper into our home. I was vain. But I am not leaving you. I am not leaving our son. Fight this. Fight it all the way to the end. The key. It's where I always kept my secrets. In the spy. It was always you, Ellie. It was just always you. Eleanor closed the journal. The tears were gone, replaced by an arctic calm. She picked up her phone and dialed her lawyer. Clara, she said, her voice clear and cold as a bell. I have the smoking gun, and we are changing our entire strategy. We are no longer contesting the will. In fact, we are going to help them validate it. Clara Hayes was silent for a beat. Eleanor, what did you find? The surrogate's court of New York County was a grand, cavernous room of marble and dark wood designed to make mortals feel small. Today, it felt like an arena. The gallery was packed with reporters, financial journalists, and the morbidly curious. Eleanor Vance sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Julian and Clara Hayes. She was a portrait of quiet dignity, her gaze fixed forward. Across the aisle, Serafina Dubois was in her element. She wore a pristine white Chanel suit, a stark, calculated contrast to Eleanor's black. She whispered and giggled with her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, radiating confidence. She was playing the part of the victor. The past 3 days of testimony had been grueling. Marcus Thorne had been a maestro, painting Eleanor as a wife in name only, presenting evidence of separate vacations of public appearances where she and Arthur seemed distant. He painted Julian as an ungrateful disappointment who had been pushed out of the company for incompetence. Then he put Serafina on the stand. She was magnificent. She wept as she described Arthur's brilliance and loneliness. "He was surrounded by people who wanted things from him," she cried. "I was the only one who wanted him." She detailed his final days. "He was so clear," she testified, looking earnestly at the judge. "He told me, 'Serafina, they never valued what we built.' You do. I want you to protect my legacy. That's all I'm trying to do." Finally, Thorne called Dr. Isabella Ramirez the nurse. She was poised, professional, and utterly damning. "Mr. Vance was sharp as a tack that day," she said, her voice firm. "He was on painkillers, yes, but his cognitive function was unimpaired. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was happy, relieved." Clara Hayes's cross-examination was brutal, but Dr. Ramirez held firm. The $100, $1,000, a gift. Mr. Vance was an incredibly generous man. He said it was for loyal service. Now it was time for closing arguments. Marcus Thorne went first, striding before the judge. "Your Honor," he boomed, "the evidence is overwhelming. Arthur Vance, a brilliant, decisive man, made a clear, rational, and valid choice in his final weeks. He chose love. He chose devotion. He chose Ms. Serafina Dubois. To invalidate this will would be to trample on the final dying wish of a great man. It would be a gross miscarriage of justice, all to appease the bruised ego of a scorned wife." He sat down. Serafina gave him a subtle, approving nod. Then Clara Hayes stood up. The courtroom leaned in. Everyone was expecting a fiery rebuttal, a last-ditch effort to prove undue influence. Instead, Clara's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Your Honor, we agree." A murmur swept the room. Marcus Thorne's brow furrowed. Serafina's smile tightened. Clara continued. "We have listened to the defense, and we can no longer in good conscience dispute the facts as they were presented. The will dated October 14th was indeed signed by Arthur Vance. He was, as Dr. Ramirez testified, of sound mind and body to do so. The signature is his. The witnesses were present." Julian looked at Clara, his face a mask of betrayal. "Clara, what are you—" Eleanor placed a hand on his arm. "Wait." Clara turned to the judge. "The plaintiff, Eleanor Vance, withdraws her challenge to the 2023 will. We ask that the court validate the will and enter it into probate immediately." It was a legal surrender. A complete and total capitulation. Marcus Thorne looked utterly bewildered. He had a dozen counter-arguments ready, and she had just stolen his victory by agreeing with him. Serafina's confusion lasted only a second before it was replaced by a slow-dawning, blindingly triumphant smile. She had won. Eleanor had given up. She looked across the aisle, locking eyes with Eleanor. The judge, Evelyn Reed, a woman who had seen everything, looked down from her bench, equally perplexed. "Ms. Hayes, this is highly irregular. You are withdrawing your entire case." "Yes, Your Honor," Clara said. "We believe the will is valid." Judge Reed shuffled her papers. "Very well. In light of the plaintiff's withdrawal, based on the testimony presented and the physical evidence of the will itself, this court has no choice but to find in favor of the defense. The will of Arthur Vance, dated October 14th, 2023, is hereby ruled valid and entered into probate." A sharp, ecstatic gasp came from Serafina. She turned and threw her arms around Marcus Thorne. The camera flashes from the press gallery exploded, capturing her look of pure, unadulterated victory. She turned back to Eleanor. Her smile was no longer subtle. It was a vicious, victorious sneer. She had done it. She had taken everything. And that is when it happened. Eleanor Vance saw that smile. She heard the finality of the judge's words, the validation of the document that had erased her 35-year marriage. The room which had been buzzing suddenly went silent in her ears. The fluorescent lights blurred into cruel white streaks. The air became thick and unbreathable. "Mom!" Julian's voice sounded miles away. Eleanor's hand went to her chest. Her legs gave out. She pitched forward a puppet with its strings cut. "Mom!" Julian screamed, catching her before she hit the floor. "Medic! Someone get a medic! Chaos!" The judge banged her gavel. "Order, order in the court!" Eleanor Vance had collapsed unconscious in the center of the courtroom, defeated. Serafina Dubois watched the scene, her smile frozen in place. She had not only won the war, she had witnessed the total annihilation of her enemy. It was perfect. "Clear the courtroom," Judge Reed commanded, banging her gavel against the wooden block. "Paramedics are on their way." Julian knelt on the floor, cradling his mother's head. Mom, wake up. Please." Eleanor's face was ashen, her breathing shallow. Reporters were shouting, cameras flashing. Marcus Thorne, sensing the bad optics of his client's smirk, put a hand on Serafina's arm. "Look concerned," he hissed. Serafina's smile instantly vanished, replaced by a mask of shocked worry. Paramedics rushed in, pushing a gurney. "We need to get her to a hospital," one of them said, checking her pulse. "No," a weak voice whispered. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. She was disoriented, humiliated, but the fire was back. "No, I'm all right." "Ma'am, you lost consciousness," the paramedic insisted. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, pushing herself up with Julian's help. She was shaky, but she stood. "I will not leave this room." Judge Reed, seeing the determination in Eleanor's face, sighed. "Paramedics, please wait in the hall. Mrs. Vance, are you certain you are well enough to continue? I am your honor." Eleanor said, her voice stronger now. She straightened her black dress and retook her seat, ignoring the stares. Judge Reed looked at the room. "Let this be a warning. This is a court of law, not a theater. Another outburst, and I will have you all removed." She looked at Serafina and Thorne. "And I would advise the defense to contain their enthusiasm. We are not finished here." The Serafina's smile faltered. "But, Your Honor," Marcus Thorne began, "the will has been validated. The case is closed." "Your case, Mr. Thorne, the challenge to the will is closed," Judge Reed corrected, her eyes sharp. "The probate of the estate, however, is just beginning, and I have another matter on my docket concerning this estate." Thorne's face went blank. I don't understand, Your Honor. What other matter?" Judge Reed looked down at her desk and picked up a single large sealed manila envelope. It was marked with the seal of Hadley, Stern, and Finch. "Last week," the judge announced, "this court received this document delivered by courier from Mr. Gideon Blackwood, Mr. Vance's longtime counsel. It was filed under seal with very specific instructions. It was to remain sealed and unentered until the precise moment the will of October 14th was declared valid by this court." A cold dread, heavier than any physical blow, began to settle in Serafina's stomach. Her smile was gone, replaced by a twitching uncertainty. "Mr. Thorne, you just spent 3 days validating that will. Ms. Hayes, you just conceded to it. The condition has been met." "Objection," Thorne snapped, jumping to his feet. "This is preposterous. We were not made aware of any secondary document. This is outside all rules of discovery. We don't know what that is." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," Judge Reed said, her voice dropping an octave. "It's a codicil, specifically a holographic codicil filed by Mr. Vance himself via his counsel. It is not a matter of discovery for your case. It is a piece of the estate itself, and my instructions are to open it now." At the back of the courtroom, a side door opened, and Gideon Blackwood, the old-world lawyer from Part 1, stepped inside. He looked directly at Eleanor and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Your Honor," Thorne pleaded, "this is an ambush, my client." "Your client, Mr. Thorne just won her case," Judge Reed said, picking up a letter opener. "You should be celebrating." She turned her attention to the envelope. "This codicil, dated October 15th, 2023, one day after the will you just validated, is now the operative document for the distribution of the Vance estate." She slit the envelope open. Seraphina Dubois was no longer smiling. She was sheet white. She finally understood. This was a trap, and she had just spent a week gleefully, publicly, and legally arming it herself. The courtroom was so quiet, the slide of the thick vellum paper from the envelope sounded like a gunshot. Judge Reed put on her reading glasses and stared at the document for a long, silent moment. The document was not a typed legal form. It was handwritten on Arthur Vance's personal monogrammed stationery. "This is a holographic codicil," Judge Reed began, her voice resonating in the hushed room, "to the last will and testament of Arthur Vance, dated October 14th, 2023. I, Arthur Vance, being of sound mind and body, do make this codicil to my will, which I signed yesterday under duress." "Liar!" Seraphina shrieked, rising from her chair. "He wasn't under duress. He loved me." "Ms. Dubois," Judge Reed's gavel cracked like thunder. "One more sound from you, and I will have you removed in handcuffs for contempt of court. Mr. Thorne, control your client, or I will hold you in contempt as well." Seraphina sank back into her chair, her body visibly trembling, her eyes wide with panic. Judge Reed continued to read from Arthur's letter. "The will I signed yesterday was a product of coercion and emotional blackmail. The primary beneficiary, Ms. Seraphina Dubois, whose legal name I have confirmed through private investigation to be Sarah Jenkins." A wave of gasps. The reporters scribbled furiously. "Threatened to release a portfolio of expertly falsified documents. These documents were designed to frame my son, Julian Vance, for embezzlement, a move she knew would not only destroy his life, but would also sabotage the $1.2 billion merger of Vance Global with Maersk Holding. She knew my illness left me no time to fight this in court. She demanded my entire estate in exchange for her silence." Marcus Thorne was on his feet again. "Your Honor, these are baseless, libelous accusations from a dead man. This letter, it's inadmissible." "It is a holographic codicil, Mr. Thorne," Judge Reed countered, not even looking at him. "It is a legal testamentary document, and I will read it. Sit down." Thorne sat. He looked defeated. His client had lied to him. The judge continued. "I therefore invoke this codicil to amend and supersede all bequests made in the October 14th will. The following bequests are my true, final, and binding testament." The room held its breath. Item 1, to Dr. Isabella Ramirez for her perjury and her breach of medical ethics in conspiring with Ms. Jenkins, I leave nothing. A full transcript of this codicil, along with my personal notes and the findings of my investigator, Mr. David Chen, have been forwarded to the New York State Board of Medicine and the District Attorney's Office. The blood drained from Marcus Thorne's face. His star witness was now a co-conspirator. Item 2. To my son, Julian Vance. I leave my entire collection of Patek Philippe watches, my 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, and a 49% non-controlling stake in Vance Global Logistics. I also leave you my apologies. I was a hard man because I knew you were a strong one. Do not let them run you. You run them. Julian stared, stunned, as tears welled in his eyes. Item 3. To Ms. Seraphina Dubois, a.k.a. Sarah Jenkins, for her performance. As my devoted muse, I leave her the sum of $1,000 to be paid from the estate. I also bequeath to her the outstanding unpaid invoice from my private investigator, Mr. David Chen, in the amount of $85,000 for his excellent work in tracking her history of extortion in Miami and Chicago. A noise half sob, half gasp tore from Seraphina's throat. She was hyperventilating. Item 4. All the rest of my estate, all real and personal property, including the 740 Park Avenue penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the chalet in Gstaad, my private art collection, including the Degas, and all liquid assets I leave to my wife, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth, a quiet sob of vindication escaping her. Item 5. Judge Reed read her voice, softening for the first time. To my wife, Eleanor, I also leave the controlling 51% stake in Vance Global Logistics. The company was ours, Ellie. It was always ours. The gavel banged. This codicil, having been properly executed and notarized and contingent upon the validation of the October 14th will, is hereby ruled the final and controlling testament of Arthur Vance. The bequests of the October 14th will are nullified and superseded. The estate will be distributed as per the codicil. Judge Reed looked directly at Seraphina. The show, Ms. Dubois, is over. The bang of Judge Reed's gavel was not just a sound. It was a detonation. It was the full stop on one life and the starting pistol for another. In the ringing silence that followed, Seraphina Dubois, no Sarah Jenkins, remained perfectly still, her body frozen in her white Chanel suit, her eyes fixed on the judge. The words blackmail, extortion, conspiracy seemed to be ricocheting around the room too fast for her to comprehend. Her mind was a static-filled screen, unable to process this impossible, nightmarish reality. She had won. She had seen the collapse. She had heard the will validated. Miss Sarah Jenkins. A new voice, flat and devoid of emotion, cut through the courtroom. It came not from the judge or the lawyers, but from the back of the room. Two men in unassuming off-the-rack gray suits stepped forward. They looked like accountants, but their eyes were hard, and one held a folded piece of paper. They had been standing quietly with Gideon Blackwood for the last 10 minutes. Seraphina's head swiveled toward them, a jerky, robotic motion. This is a mistake," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. She looked desperately at her lawyer. "Marcus, tell them this is a mistake." Marcus Thorne, his face the color of old parchment, his professional reputation eviscerating before his very eyes, took a full, deliberate step away from her. He broke eye contact, addressing the air in front of him. "Ms. Jenkins, my representation of you concerned the probate matter only. I have no knowledge of this." He was not just washing his hands of her, he was scouring them. The legal shark was swimming fast from the blood in the water. "No." Seraphina's whisper rose in pitch. The lead detective was now in front of her. "Ms. Sarah Jenkins, You are under arrest on suspicion of blackmail extortion in the first degree and conspiracy to commit fraud." He motioned to his partner, who produced a pair of handcuffs. "Please stand and place your hands behind your back." The sight of the steel glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights shattered her paralysis. It was the one prop that did not belong in her fantasy. "No." The sound that ripped from her throat was not human. It was a guttural, animalistic shriek of pure, unadulterated rage. "He loved me! He gave it to me! You can't do this!" She flailed, lashing out her perfectly manicured nails, raking at the detective's face. "It's mine! He gave it to me!" The courtroom, which had been silent, erupted. Reporters scrambled, shouting, climbing over benches. The camera flashes were blinding, a relentless strobe light capturing the precise moment the vixen became a cornered animal. The second detective grabbed her arm in a steel-like grip. "Ma'am, stop resisting arrest! Get your hands off me!" she screamed, twisting violently. The pristine white Chanel jacket ripped at the shoulder seam. A stiletto heel went flying. She was a whirlwind of terror and fury, all her calculated poise, all her practiced sophistication sloughing off like a snake's skin to reveal the raw, desperate grifter beneath. She was dragged fighting into the center aisle. As she passed the plaintiff's table, her eyes wild with a hatred so pure, it was almost beautiful, locked onto Eleanor. "You!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You did this! You bitch! You'll pay for this!" Eleanor Vance stood slowly, her son Julian rising with her, his hand a protective brace on her back. She looked at the woman who had invaded her home, threatened her son, and spat on the memory of her 35-year marriage. All the fear, all the humiliation, all the sleepless nights of the past few months coalesced into a single diamond-hard point of Arctic calm. She felt no pity. She felt no hatred. She just felt the end. "No, Ms. Jenkins." Eleanor said, her voice quiet, yet it carried across the chaos with the clarity of a bell. "You are finally paying for this." Serafina let out one last, strangled sob as the detectives forced her arms behind her back. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was the final sound. The final gavel. It was done. At the back of the room, Gideon Blackwood silently handed a thick bound folder labeled "David Chen Final Report" to the lead detective. His face was impassive, but his eyes were satisfied. The loyal soldier, the silent executor of his friend's final brilliant command, had delivered the killing blow. The walk from the courtroom to the street was a gauntlet, but of a new kind. The media, having captured the arrest, now swarmed Eleanor and Julian. It was a wall of noise, a tidal wave of shouting questions, but the key had changed. The mournful dirge of the wronged widow was gone, replaced by a triumphant fanfare. "Mrs. Vance, was this the plan all along? Eleanor, you're the new chairman. What's your first move? Julian was the DA's case, your father's doing. You're a genius, Eleanor. You let her hang herself." Eleanor said nothing. She was no longer Eleanor Vance, the grieving, pathetic victim. She was Mrs. Vance, the matriarch. Her back, which had been bowed by grief, was now straight as a steel rod. Her head was high. The black of her suit no longer looked like mourning. It looked like armor. She didn't flinch from the cameras. She simply walked, her gaze fixed forward, an icebreaker parting a sea of chaotic flashing lights. Julian, seeing his mother's transformation, felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost choked him. He was no longer the disappointed son. He was the heir apparent. He stepped just ahead of her, his arm linked with hers, acting as a shield. "Gentlemen, please," he said, his voice imbued with a new, deep authority he hadn't possessed a week ago. My father's true legacy was honored today. He was a brilliant man who ensured his house was and always would be in order. My mother is and always has been the matriarch of this family and of Vance Global. Now, if you'll excuse us." A heavy black Rolls-Royce, courtesy of Gideon, pulled up to the curb. The door was opened, and they slid in. The thud of the heavy door was as final as the gavel sealing off the roaring chaos of the world, leaving them in a sudden, profound, leather and wood-scented silence. Gideon Blackwood got in opposite them. The car pulled smoothly into traffic. For a long minute, no one spoke. There was only the sound of the tires hissing on the damp pavement. Julian was the first to break the silence, his voice raw. He let her do it. He let her stand there and perjure herself. He let us believe she had won. He shook his head, the weight of his father's final strategy settling on him. He let the entire world think he was a pathetic old fool. "He did more than that, Julian," Gideon said, his voice gravelly. He looked at Eleanor, his old eyes full of a deep, sorrowful respect. "He called me the night he signed the codicil. He was in his study. Serafina was out celebrating. He could barely speak, he was so weak. But his voice, it was pure iron. 'Gideon,' he said, 'she needs to win. Do you understand me? She has to believe beyond all shadow of a doubt that she has won. She has to climb to the very top of the mountain so the fall is high enough to be final. She must validate that first will, Gideon. She must commit to it publicly." Gideon paused, looking out the window. "He was a hard man, Arthur. But he was a strategist to the end. He was playing chess while she was just grabbing pieces. He sacrificed his own reputation to protect the king and queen." Eleanor listened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It wasn't just a trap. It was a sacrifice. He had known the media would call him a lecherous, senile fool. He had known his friends would mock his memory. And he had known it would put Eleanor and Julian through a public, humiliating hell. He had trusted them. Trusted that they were strong enough to endure it. Trusted that she, his Ellie, wouldn't break. Her collapse in the courtroom. She suddenly wondered if Arthur had somehow even anticipated that. He knew her. He knew what that victory, that final triumphant sneer from Serafina would do to her. And he knew perhaps that she would get back up. Because she was a Vance. The doorman at 740 Park Avenue. Johnson, who had looked at her with such profound pity for the past month, seemed to stand straighter. The obsequious ma'am was gone, replaced by a deep, renewed respect. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance." When the private elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer, Maria, their housekeeper of 20 years, was standing there. Her hands were clasped, her eyes red. The moment she saw Eleanor, she burst into quiet, relieved tears. "Ma'am, oh, Mrs. Vance, it's good to have you home." "It's all right, Maria," Eleanor said, her voice gentle. "We're home." But the penthouse. Her penthouse felt wrong. It smelled wrong. It was coated in a thick, sweet, cloying perfume. Serafina's signature scent, gardenia and something metallic like ambition. While Julian spoke to Maria, Eleanor walked into the grand salon. Serafina had already made her mark. The family photos on the antique console table, Julian at graduation, Eleanor and Arthur at the Met Gala 10 years ago, were gone, replaced by a sterile, sharp-edged modern sculpture. The beloved Biedermeier chairs were gone, replaced by something in chrome and white leather that looked painfully uncomfortable. And the Degas, her Degas, the pastel of the pensive dancer that Arthur had bought her for their 10th anniversary, had been moved. It was no longer in its place of honor over the fireplace. It had been relegated to a shadowy corner by the bar, as if it were an afterthought. Eleanor walked straight to the large bay windows, the ones that overlooked the park. Without a word, she unlatched them and pushed them wide open. The cold, clean November air rushed in a blessed sharp exorcism. It whipped at her hair, but she didn't care. She needed to breathe her own air in her own home. Julian came to stand beside her. She really moved in, didn't she? She was an occupier, Eleanor said. But the occupation is over. Later that night, long after Julian had gone to his own room, exhausted by the emotional whiplash, Eleanor sat in the salon. The windows were still open. The air was frigid, but it was clean. Clara Hayes had sent over the last of their files. On top of the box was the journal. Eleanor poured herself a glass of the Macallan 25 Arthur's favorite and sat on the sofa. The city lights were a river of diamonds below. She opened the book. She had only read the last desperate entries. Now she started from the beginning. She saw the entries from months ago detailing his fears not of death, but of irrelevance. August 10th. Met S. Dubois at the gallery opening. She's vibrant. Said my collection was safe and lacked passion. The audacity. I found it amusing. She makes me feel not old. Eleanor felt a sharp, familiar sting of jealousy, but it was followed by a profound sadness. He had been so vain and so vulnerable. September 4th. The diagnosis. Cancer. The words are meaningless. I feel fine, but the clock is ticking. Ellie is trying to be strong, but I see the terror in her eyes. I hate it. I hate making her feel that. September 20th. S is attentive. She doesn't treat me like a sick man. She treats me like a man. Is it real? Does it matter, vanity? Such a damning human sin. She read on, watching the entries grow darker as his vanity gave way to suspicion. October 5th. The PI report is vile. She's a black widow, a professional, and she's been in my house, near my family. I've been a fool, a colossal, arrogant fool. October 9th. The confrontation. She didn't even flinch. She just smiled and laid out the files on Julian. He'll go to prison, Arthur, and your company will be ashes. She's right. The forgeries are perfect. She must have had help. I'm trapped. I have no time. My God, I have no time. October 14th. I did it. I signed my life away. The nurse Ramirez. That ghoul. She filmed it. I had to smile. I had to read the words. I love you, Serafina. It felt like swallowing glass. She's celebrating. I can hear her on the phone in the guest room. She's smart, but she's not a chess player. She's a burglar. She only sees the prize. She doesn't see the next move. And then the final 2 entries. The plan. The call to Gideon. And the last page, the one she knew by heart. It was always you, Ellie. It was just always you. She closed the book, holding it to her chest. The tears that came now were not the hot tears of betrayal, nor the cold tears of rage. They were tears of understanding. Theirs had not been a simple storybook marriage. It was a 35-year epic of passion and bitter fights and towering ambition and unbreakable partnership. He was not a saint, and she admitted to the cold night air, was not always a solace. But they were real. He had seen his own flaw, his own vanity, and in his final brilliant, terrible act, he had used that very flaw as the bait. He had trusted her to be the hammer. Eleanor stood. She walked to the bar, where an opened half-full bottle of Dom Perignon sat in a melted ice bucket Serafina's left from her premature celebration. Eleanor picked it up, walked to the sink, and poured the entire bottle of expensive champagne down the drain. The fizzing sound was one of finality. Thorne would be disbarred. Ramirez would go to prison. Serafina. She would be a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. They were just collateral damage from an explosion Arthur Vance had lit himself. Eleanor Vance turned off the lights, leaving the windows open. The war was over. The matriarch was home. And tomorrow she had a company to run. And so the gavel fell, not with the sound of an ending, but of a beginning. Eleanor Vance didn't just win back her fortune. She reclaimed her name, her legacy, and her power. The story of the Vance inheritance serves as a chilling reminder the brightest smiles can hide the darkest motives, and true justice often waits for the final word. Serafina's public downfall was as swift as her rise was calculated, proving that a house built on lies will always collapse. What did you think of Arthur's final brilliant move? Was it justice or the cold-blooded revenge of a dying king? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of drama, justice, and shocking twists, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a good story. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel and ring the bell. You won't want to miss the tales we have coming up next.